Welcome to part 4 of the Atheist Alpha course, which for those just joining aims to give you a blueprint for modern living and the insight and tools you need to have a great life without the need for a false deity, and it uses ridicule of religion as a vehicle. This final part 4 puts things in an historical context, explains why secularism without religion is the way forward, and has some suggestions on what you can do to help. Religion versus secularism is the 21st century war that will determine the future of our species. We face big threats today, deadly enemies who mean us harm. The argument that the cause of terrorism is our resistance to it is a root fallacy. Presently we have a huge Islamic caliphate which doesn't recognise borders, and it will be masochistic and capitulationist to appease it. Soon we will have Iran, a theocracy with nuclear weapons. What will appease the desire to be a martyr for God? What reasonable argument will convince the irrational? Atheists don't hate religious people, just the virus of adultery. Before we focus on what we can do about all religion, particularly radical Islam, now and in the future, let's just firstly remember the historical context. It took the West centuries to bring the extremes of Christianity mostly to heel, and it still poisons our societies now. We should consider our own history regarding human rights for homosexuals, blacks, women, children, the disabled, and so on. What right have we to demand other societies instantly move to the social model which we ourselves have only just decided is the right one to follow? We are evidence that societies take time to change. It took us centuries to become enlightened. The problem is, we can't afford to wait centuries for the East to catch up. Optimistic religious apologists believe that when Muslims finally move away from clerically manipulated theocracy and return to the uncorrupted divine text of the religion, they will clearly see through all the horrific posturing of the jihadi militants. They argue that the supposed crimes of blasphemy and apostasy have been invented by the religious zealots to justify their jihadism and have no basis in true Islam. According to them, these hardliners have substituted the compassionate text of the Quran for man-made, intolerant, narrow-minded, misogynistic works of later times, like the Hadith, the highly disputed collection of sayings of the Prophet Muhammad written more than 3 centuries after he lived, and by medieval Sharia, a medley of masculine time-bound opinion that is not Islamic law. They argued that the notorious imposition of fatwas by fundamentalist clerics, the hounding of Salman Rushdie being one of the worst examples, that this lethal dogma has done incalculable damage to the Muslim faith by unfairly painting the religion as divisive, extreme, and dangerous, and somehow Islam will grow out of it. But this is naive. Radical Islam is entrenched, and the West is vulnerable to attackers consumed by hatred for our culture, its values, and manifest superiority to those which they come from. These fundamentalists cannot be compromised or parleyed with, often even with other Muslims, because they have no rational political demands. They claim affiliation to a feudal order in which women are denied rights, technology is banished, and mullahs arbitrate over daily life. Academics and historians note that in reality, freedom is a relatively modern idea, and huge numbers of people, many of them hardline Muslims, bitterly resist it. The Christian Crusades ended in the Middle Ages, and for us in the West, it's been an issue of development. It took us about 3 centuries after the Enlightenment, when reason and individualism began to assert themselves in the 17th and 18th centuries, to become comfortable with what we now call cultural freedom. The Middle East has not had that time, and we cannot expect societies which have fomented radicalism throughout the world to do so in a few years. Fundamentalists feel a much stronger attachment to their tribe or sect than to any nation state. Jihadism from this view represents a response to the challenge of a secular urban civilization. Many Islamists regard democracy and secularism as a religion that should be subjugated. It is not surprising that a fanatical minority, inspired by a romantic longing to return to the doctrines and practices of pure Islam, aim at destroying the Western civilization, which they see as debauching and which threatens to destroy their traditional values and the purity of their own culture and beliefs. But understanding the fanatics' motivation does not in the least diminish the need vigorously to defend ourselves against them. In some ways, it's harder to counter people who acknowledge allegiance to no national flag than to confront Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, or even Iran. We would have much more cause to be fearful of the Islamic fanatics if we were peddling a coherent doctrine such as communism or fascism with a spurious pure plausibility. Instead, in reality, the jihadists' murderous outrages represent frustration and fury against the 21st century, in which they are so ill-fitted to compete. And this is a battle we cannot afford to lose. We are at a defining point in the history of our species here. There is so much harm done by religion every day. Doesn't it make you scream in anger and cry in frustration? Stop being part of the problem. We have an opportunity now to stand up for humanity, reason and sanity by demanding secularism is the only choice when it comes to state power. Religion must be relegated to its rightful place. Superstition sidelined in a modern world. We are a world away from making major inroads, yet the sooner we start, the sooner we can evolve society and deal with the issues that affect us. We should never try to ban religion, but we have to separate it from influencing society. We have to get to a position where we are now, for instance where no one can get elected in America if they don't believe in God, to a position where no one can get elected if they do believe in an imaginary friend. Atheists have to become a more effective lobbying force, and just because one religion is less of a threat than another, we cannot say one superstition is fundamentally better than another, or we are legitimizing the concept of belief. We can't fall into the trap of saying this God is better than that God. No, that's like saying my God is better than your God, which is what has got us into this mess in the first place. It's a meaningless panacea when we invent a God that can do anything and be anything. It serves as an answer to every question and an explanation for nothing. What we need for the future is a contemplative science unrestrained by dogma. You don't need free will to have some concept of moral truth, and you don't need a God. There is just us. That makes us responsible, and as a society, we make the judgments. Crime requires punishment to regulate people's behaviour and deter and avoid crime, but has nothing to do with retribution. Our morality is given by community, society, and we are still learning, but we are getting better. We have evolved beyond just survival of the fittest. We look after the weak and sick. Determinism is not fatalism. If there is a need for ritual, we have to understand it in rational humanist terms, not in first century superstition. Some believe religious beliefs are unstoppable, but anti-theists believe it is not true. It is merely conditioning. We can and must, as a species, rid ourselves of these primitive faiths as soon as possible. It is patronising and self-defeating to say that whilst intellectuals don't need religion, poor, uneducated people do. We have to change everybody. Just because we may have a genetic and cultural disposition towards religion, even a biological disposition by natural selection, it doesn't mean we can't try to cure ourselves of it. Goodbye should be short. We need to expedite. If we can shorten it, we will reach a tipping point. We need an imperative that society makes laws, not God. Arranged against the forces of reason, there are armies, evangelical and fundamentalist. We need an army for reason, which is positive but not aggressive. One of the problems is that enlightened people have their own agendas and are too busy having a good time. Richard Dawkins says that organising such a group of free thinkers is like herding cats. So how can we congregate into an effective force? How can we change things? Well, given how entrenched religion is, change has to be incremental, and you can do your part. We have to say love and curiosity is sufficient. We must praise intellectual honesty and argue for reason and evidence. Some say we need to unite under a banner, like the civil rights movement or those who wanted to end slavery. Others argue that we should not call ourselves anti-theists any more than we need the term anti-astrologer or non-racist. Perhaps atheists will have to come together, demonstrate outside churches like Christians outside abortion clinics, or with placards showing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad outside a mosque, to underline that free speech is more important than the sensitivities of any religion. I would welcome your ideas on the best way forward, so please comment and get in touch. But in the meantime, there are some practical steps you can take. Here's a top 10. Firstly, lobby to stop religious indoctrination in schools. Is it right to have religion in school at all? Well, of course, but in the right way. Under the Education Act, each school is required to have some form of collective act of worship, children coming together to pray, sing, or act out a faith story. Perhaps this was acceptable 30 years ago, but its place in society is now gone. Only 7% of the population attend church on a regular basis. So why is it that schools up and down the country should act as recruiting agents for God? Some schools teach beliefs that are contrary to the views of society in which we live and encourage divisiveness. Forget Muslim schools, you only have to look at Northern Ireland to see the effects of separation and sectarianism. How can a faith school teach that all faiths are equal when the theology of the school's faith demands its followers to believe that they are the only true way to God? This is an outdated and quite farcical concept. Many teachers find it difficult to maintain a balance in their approach, find the whole idea very uncomfortable. There are countless creation myths through time and cultures. Why should a Christian one receive privileged consideration? Hesiod's Theogony carries the account of the origins and genealogies of the Greek gods. Should that be considered too? And faith schools that often get better results has more to do with history, catchment areas, and middle-class parents, and their ability to discriminate and select pupils on the basis of faith rather than any Christian values they espouse. Religious dogmas and outdated cultural concepts have to be challenged and not received as absolute truths, and we need to teach skepticism with all religions to avoid indoctrination and radicalization. The only place for faith in our schools is as a subject delivered on the same level as history, maths and science. It is important that it is still taught, and it should be compulsory for every student to learn, but as a factual and not spiritual discipline. In the age of rising fundamentalism, it is important that any aspect other than the academic study of faiths is stripped out from our education system. Students should be free to learn about perceived beliefs in an environment of critical study and analysis. This is a vital job because it addresses Islamic extremism in schools. In Britain alone, the cases exposed in Birmingham and East London recently represent only the tip of a frighteningly large iceberg. Many schools are promoting values totally at odds with those of our society and unacceptable to it. Secularism in schools will become a necessity for future generations. Schools will have to become places of intellectual safety and out of the control of religious groups with vested interests. Informed consent is the bedrock of democracy. Let children be taught about all religions. Parents are stewards of their children, and they have a responsibility. Children should not be kept ignorant of other faiths. 2. Help to redefine charity. Religion cannot be justified because of the charitable work it does. There is not a single moral action that a believer does that a non-believer cannot. Hamas does charitable work, yet it wants to wipe out every Jew. Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam might take kids off drugs, but it doesn't prove the validity of faith. Mother Teresa, again associated with charity, said that what India needs is more missionaries and wanted a campaign against abortion and birth control. Many charitable organisations like Médecins Sans Frontières undertake work without the proselytizing element. If you use religion as a motivation to do charity work, if you subscribe to do good and go to heaven, do bad and go to hell, then how moral are you being if you act under the auspices of bribery or blackmail? Atheists argue that good work can be undertaken without the need for threat or reward. All gods are myths, and no good comes out of any of them, regardless of some of their worshippers doing good deeds. Quakers who fought slavery did so because they were good people, not because they were Christian. Religions are self-perpetuating money-making machines which prey on the ignorant, fearful, credulous and gullible. Atheists imagine a world where for every prayer said, a good deed was done instead, and for every church built, instead a hospital or care home was built. Many secular charities do much good, but we never hear them claiming in the media that their good works confer the right to dictate how the country should be run, to discriminate, or to promote the primacy of their philosophical beliefs. All over the UK, every day of the year, people of all religious beliefs and none perform selfless work and activities to raise funds for those worse off in some way or give up their valuable personal time as volunteers to make better the lives of others less fortunate. Should you give to the Salvation Army if it helps the homeless but at the same time campaigns against same-sex marriage? We should rightly object where receipt of charity is dependent on some form of religious observance. Some charities also can be used as fronts for Islamic fundamentalism. 3 Britons who raised £12,000 posing as collectors for Muslim aid were jailed for planning mass suicide attacks. It is not easy for the authorities and the Charities Commission to move against them because the claims of human rights, multiculturalism and community harmony are invoked in defence of a right to espouse extremist doctrine. Having Jewish, Muslim or Christian specifically tailored charities is wrong and divisive. Secular charities do not prostitute their charitable works as special privilege in society. That is the sole prerogative of religious groups. Religions looking to leverage this work in exchange for power and privilege and to champion their allegedly superior belief system should not be allowed charity status. 3. Stop homophobia. We've said enough about this in previous parts of the course. A gay religious person should be oxymoronic. Why try to rationalize a way into a faith that rejects you? You may have a friend or relative who has been messed up trying to square this circle. Do you think they're going to hell? This alone should be enough for you to reject religion. 4. Help empower women. At its most repugnant, the belief that women must be subjugated to the wishes of men excuses slavery, violence, forced prostitution, genital mutilation, and national laws that admit rape as a crime. Allow women control over their own reproductive cycle. Campaign for sex education, contraception, and a women's right to choose. 5. Challenge belief. Science is there to be attacked, but God has been specifically designed to be beyond the verification process of science. If someone votes for another political party, you can have an argument as much as you like. If you think taxes should go up, argue about it. Religion does not work like that, because it is considered sacred or holy, and we've gotten familiar with it. So if an Orthodox Jew says you can't move a light switch on a Saturday, you respect it, because it's ring-fenced and it's not challenged. Or when someone says, my car got a flat tire on the way to the airport, it was a miracle I was not on that plane that crashed. What about the people who died? If someone in hospital pulls through, it was not a miracle. It was the medicine and the care of doctors and nurses, not prayer. When you look at it rationally, there is no reason that religious people should not be challenged. In fact, we have to challenge these people who say they have a total lock on universal truth without evidence, because it strains our credulity. You may feel sometimes as an atheist you're the only adult in Disneyland. Nevertheless, the vast majority of believers in God are kind, and we don't hate the people, but we do hate the virus they carry, which is idolatry. We can no longer afford to perpetuate the myths. The process of enlightenment has to be tackled. You have to bite the bullet. You must try to discuss issues with the religious people you know. Because we have to stop giving religion a free pass and make people more aware there is no God in everyday life. Fanatical aspects and intolerant dogmatism of all religions must be challenged and ridiculed. But to do that effectively means challenging and ridiculing every adherent in any religion. Only by doing that will people eventually renounce their faiths and start to merge their worldviews to assist and help each other in finding a common ground and moving humanity forward so that we all value each other for who and what we are and not for what we believe. Whilst you do not want to sound like a Jehovah's Witness on a doorstep, atheists do and should feel morally obligated to tell the truth as we see it. Atheists have seen the light, and we should preach and proselyte too. We need to help believers. Someone who believes in God is wasting big parts of his or her life, holding back science and love, and giving moral support to dangerous extremists. If you believe something, you must share it. It's one of the ways we all learn about truth. 6. Fight for free speech. Free speech is not primarily for you. It is so you can hear others, so you can have interplay and educate and enlighten both ways. Otherwise, you make yourself a prisoner of your own beliefs. This is different from information which can be classified, personal and copyrighted information. It is difficult to listen to some views in a democratic society, but you have to swallow it for the greater benefit. You are not free to say anything, just like you can't shout fire in a crowded theatre without just cause. Those instigating violence must be punished. Some find it difficult to hear people say rape victims should not be allowed an abortion, but you should believe in their right to say it. So, is nothing sacred? The answer has to be no. Being offended can never be an argument against free speech. People wanting cartoonists or authors prosecuted for violence is fine, and it is not against free speech or freedom. As long as they do not encourage violence, they have a perfect right to offend people like anyone else. Wanting cartoonists killed should mean prosecution and imprisonment. Wanting Sharia law based on an ancient text in a society that already has one law for all may be wrong, but it can be ridiculed and categorized as anti-democratic using the values of free speech we uphold, not by locking people up. Correspondingly, it is wrong for any religion to claim exemption from criticism. People can't claim a special right just because they claim their own bigotry is divine. You should log on to the Humanist Society website and petition to stop blasphemy laws, as these are still on the statutes even in some European countries. Does Islam respect my right to no belief or allow someone to be an apostate? Of course not. Respect and the right to criticize has to be mutual. But religions don't like criticism, even though they are proselytizing and they impinge on our freedom. The attack against the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris has just happened before this was posted, and was the latest outrage against freedom of expression. But religion has no sense of humour. Religious people are masters at playing the I'm offended card. Humour is a great discoverer of taboos. Nothing in this world should be exempt from laughter. Freedom of expression must include the license to offend. A joke is not a joke unless it's at someone else's expense. For instance, Islam claims to be the total solution to all human problems, and the sooner it is imposed on everyone, the better. Well, that's a point of view, but if it's going to make such claims, it has to drop the demand to be immune from criticism and especially from satire, because some people might believe that Muhammad is the one true word of God. However, other people claim the Prophet was an illiterate, sadistic paedophile, an Iron Age, possibly epileptic merchant who had visions and believed in dust devils and jinns. On this basis, why should we believe this man, who says he has the word of a cruel, misogynistic, homophobic, supernatural being against all science and reason? I am not asking for the right to slaughter a pig in a mosque or defecate on a Quran, but the right to question must be claimed. Insults go both ways. To many, the claims of Muhammad to be a prophet are absurd, and we tackle them the same way as a child-molesting priest or an unchaste nun. Finally, a word on thought crime. David Irving, the historian who denied the Holocaust, was sent to jail for a thought crime in Austria. Let me repeat that. Jailed for thought crime. 1984 writ large. This is wrong. We should not be punished for what we think. Although you should not give any time to a Holocaust denier like him, the same way you should not give any time to anyone arguing the Stork theory of reproduction, you stop him by ridicule and debate, not by locking him up. You cannot stop brown shirts with brown shirts. Although you should fight for free speech, you should draw the line when it comes to incitement to violence. 7. Lobby to stop extremist preaching. The young, the gullible, credulous, impressionable and vulnerable are easy prey for religion. We should never underrate their role of boredom and a search for purpose in persuading unstable young men to embrace terrorism. Many who take up violence are losers, immersed in the sociology of poverty and frustration, incapable of achieving social or professional success in their adopted societies, and these are the useful idiots of radical Islam, who become the suicide bombers while the mullahs encourage from the back. We should not forget that many Western Muslims who commit atrocities abroad or at home do so after being radicalized here. So the authorities must use existing laws more effectively and attack racially and religiously aggravated hate crimes. Preachers who call for British soldiers to be brought back from Iraq in body bags can and are jailed. If you have a placard calling for the annihilation and beheading of those who insult Islam, or a banner that says massacre those who insult Islam, you should be prosecuted and jailed. A British hate preacher backed the Paris massacres just hours after the bloody events unfolded and told his followers Britain is the enemy of Islam, and praised the Boko Haram militants who kidnapped more than 300 Nigerian schoolgirls. His kind of rhetoric is not an echo of Islamist terror and extremism, it is a driving force behind it, and it is very difficult to swallow. With the skill of a mountain goat, those who encourage bigotry and alienate and incite the impressionable walk a fine dividing line between free speech and fomenting hatred. Britain is not an enemy of Islam, but all free-minded people should be an enemy of all religion. We've got conspiracy laws, laws against sedition and treason, as well as legislation against hate crimes and incitement. We have Schedule 7 powers under the Terrorism Act 2000, which allows police to stop, examine and search passengers at ports, airports and international rail terminals. Surely it is not beyond the wit and wisdom of politicians, police and the law to use common sense in applying punishment to those who seek to incite violence and undermine liberty. The Human Rights Act is often counterproductive and used to challenge everything from prisoners' access to porn to virtually limitless rights to immigration appeal, which paralyses the whole system and has become something of a gravy train for lawyers. It should be repealed and the legal aid system should be reformed. Instead, we should rely on the maturity of the secular societies we live in to uphold freedoms whilst instructing the police and security services to close down extremist Islamist websites, stop our prisons being used as Al-Qaeda recruiting officers, shut down mosques which are led by fanatics and religious schools which foment terrorism, prosecute and deport foreign hate preachers, and lock up those proven fanatics with British passports. Judicial common sense in the context of overall intent must prevail. If necessary, legislation needs to be approved giving guidance to the judiciary to apply overriding law in key areas regarding national security, rather than be bogged down by technicalities that grind on and enfeeble and encourage a sense of powerlessness. While the best response to those who object to being laughed at is to laugh at them back, when they cross the line and encourage violence, we need to be firm and resolute. If a Muslim issues a death sentence for Salman Rushdie writing a book or for someone drawing a cartoon, they should be condemned and prosecuted. And it should not be restricted to Islam. Although Christianity mostly has an acceptable face now in the West, if a preacher says a hurricane was the result of licentiousness amongst unmarried mothers, or AIDS was a curse from God for homosexuals, they should be condemned and considered for prosecution. Lobby the media. Sometimes police and politicians hesitate because they do not want to rock the boat or risk upsetting community cohesion. Yet ironically, it is this very inaction which is the greatest risk to community cohesion. Unless grievances are addressed, we risk a backlash where extremist right-wing parties pick up support because these issues are not addressed and tackled. Free speech is about rocking the boat and causing offence to some. Could you envisage what an inoffensive political cartoon would look like? The BBC does not show any representation of the Prophet Muhammad in any shape or form. Its deferential approach to religion is a barrier to free debate and critical discussion of religion. Too often it fawns over clerics and gives up far too many resources to religious topics that do not interest the vast majority of its viewers and listeners. The desire not to offend must be subjugated to the principle of free speech. Otherwise, no freedom is allowed. Like a muscle or a machine, some things need exercising or they will become inoperative. Shamefully, by not broadcasting the likes of Charlie Hebdo cartoons, the BBC has reneged on its charter to inform and educate by pandering to Muslim sensitivities. How can people make rational judgments unless the material is shown? The media and press need to print Mohammed cartoons, otherwise self-censorship will prevail and free speech will be lost. Atheism needs to be brought further up the political agenda. Little thing like atheists on Radio 4 Thought for the Day, and atheists being allowed to give moral viewpoints like religious representatives. Media has to take responsibility. On one hand, you have cynical atheist editors wearing a wry smile while allowing religious figures poisonous views without redress. On the other, you have the likes of News Corp boss Rupert Murdoch recently suggesting that all Muslims must take responsibility for the actions of terrorists until the jihadist cancer is destroyed. But all Muslims are not responsible. History is littered with examples of minorities controlling the agenda, from the Bolsheviks and Nazis to modern-day theocracies. The majority of fair-minded populations are in thrall and have to play along. If radicals are given the oxygen of airtime, there should be at least equal time to repudiate that poison. A recent disturbing development is the enabling of a law against criticising the President of Turkey, with subsequent arrests despite its secular constitution. Media must defend freedom of speech and fight anti-secularists. Accept a balance between privacy and security. How do we deal with the enemy within? In truth, Assange and Snowden have damaged the security of each and every one of us by alerting the jihadis and Al-Qaeda, our mortal enemies, to the scale and reach of electronic eavesdropping. Even in an open and democratic society, some things must fly under the radar. But at the same time, we want to expose failings like waterboarding. And who will whistleblow if we prosecute constantly? Technology, though, is a double-edged sword. Whilst some websites indoctrinate and militants use technology, at the same time, it may help herald the end of theocratic states. Much of the new Muslim generation are internet and YouTube savvy, and perhaps that will help change come from within in countries like Iran. We have to accept a balance between privacy and security. All Islamic fanatics loathe the liberal values of open pluralistic societies. Our response must be one of resolution in defence of liberty and freedom of expression, two of the central foundations of our democratic society. There can be no compromise with the twisted extremist ideology that inspires slaughter, and we want to avoid Big Brother, but at the same time we have to recognise that we can never have complete privacy and complete security. There has to be some sort of compromise. So it is just where we draw the line. MI5 wants more powers to intercept communications, but there is concern about allowing a snooper's charter and our personal information being accessed. In a nutshell, it is our civil liberties and privacy versus national security. It should not be beyond our abilities to organise strict rules. Authorised access to personal information on the grounds of reasonable suspicion of a terrorist threat signed off for the police by a senior judge. Also, social media websites, search engines, banks for terrorist finance, apps, these must all play a part in fighting those who advocate terrorism. 8. Lobby to outlaw child circumcision. Why do we allow people to mutilate the bodies of their children? This is little short of being allowed to sell them, and it's worse than beating them, because mutilation never heals. There is no good argument in favour of circumcision. If you think it's done for cleanliness, then just teach the child to wash. We don't cut off people's hands because they might use them instead of toilet paper. If it's to prevent a future problem, then we should be taking out every child's appendix and tonsils, and maybe even the prostate gland for men, as those are magnitudes higher in terms of potential danger to a human being. But we don't do this. While religion may condone it, let's not forget what else religion has condoned: stoning, genocide, slavery, rapists, disfigurement, and the sale of daughters. We have shown that we are better than that, and those religious sanctioned brutalities have gone by the way in most societies. The physical mutilation of children should also go into the dustbin of history. It's a barbaric disgrace to human rights, and it should be outlawed. 9. No exemption for kosher and halal animal slaughter. Just think about it for a second. The whole reason for this ritual slaughter is to keep the animal alive as long as possible so that the blood drains out of the meat while the animal is still conscious. This all stems from a taboo about blood. They have taboos that relate to menstrual blood too. That is the purpose. Some apologist websites will claim that after the throat is slit, the animal is then rendered immediately unconscious, but there is no monitoring of this, and they do not acknowledge any standards for this practice. Also, they are supposed to say a prayer at the time of slaughter, so it depends on how fast they can talk, I suppose. When an animal is dead, the heart stops and the blood doesn't flow. It does drain a little, but there is no pressure behind it. Frankly, all slaughter is brutal, and the people consistently doing it necessarily have to be numbed to the pain and terror of the animal in order to do their jobs. There is no good way to handle this, but those commercial operations that are required to render the animal unconscious before killing it are far more humane than traditional kosher or halal slaughters. We routinely protect animals from undue pain and cruelty, but for religion, we make an exception. It's time to stop this. As with other activities impacting animals that are now considered to be crimes, we need to bring the standards of the religious up to the rest of us when it comes to cultural morals. Kosher and halal meat should be outlawed as the inarguably cruel practice that it is, and this was recently done in Denmark. This form of slaughter is not allowed in many countries except for religious reasons. The exemption must go. 10. Ban the niqab and burqa. The niqab and burqa should be banned for social cohesion. They are divisive. It's about patriarchy, sexism, misogyny and coercion. They help treat women as the sexual property of men and diminishes their status. They have no theological foundation in the Quran. Verse 24, chapter 30 stipulates, men should lower their gaze. Therefore, in ancient times, faces were shown. Muslim women on pilgrimage to Mecca are forbidden to cover their faces. You can't leave your house naked. You will be arrested for indecent exposure. And you can't go round a bank or public buildings with a balaclava or motorcycle helmet on. The niqab and burqa are intrinsically isolating and make others in society uncomfortable because they can't see people's facial expressions and read character. We should also have no prayer rooms in workplaces, no police turning a blind eye to genital mutilation or allowing praying in the street blocking traffic, universities allowing jihadis to recruit on campus, medical staff being allowed to ignore hygiene rules, or halal food being imposed on the population without their knowledge and consent. So we just have to accept the reality of where we are and fight to improve it. Humanists make sense of the world according to reason, experience, and shared human values. They aim to make the best of this life because it is the only life we have. Humanists do not resort to supernatural or superstitious thinking to make sense of the world. The most important thing in life is to increase the general happiness and well-being of humanity and believe that morality stems from human nature rather than some supernatural source. The reality is we decide. We can cherry-pick using our ethical intuitions from the 21st century. Faith is a conversation stopper. Only willingness to listen and be open to discourse is the way forward. Unless we can call into question the dogma of faith, we will never be able to call into question the reasons for religious violence. We need much more critical discussion of religion. We cannot, as a society, place religion beyond the reach of satire or critical examination. Ultimately, the only way for us as a species to progress quickly is to cut the cancer of religion from our society in its entirety regarding its place in the decision-making processes. Stop wasting the one and only life you know you're going to have worrying about and working for an afterlife that someone told you might be there. Think for yourself and enjoy your present life. People have spiritual experiences, but a beautiful sunset or a newborn baby is not proof of a God. People have positive human emotions and traits all the time, and are maximizing these experiences. This is our goal. Just like learning to play the piano, these are skills that are trainable. You can learn compassion, tolerance, and kindness, because our brains are like instruments to be learned. What do you think and feel matters. Whether you act or not, ethically without religion matters. Therefore, we can change our minds, others' minds, and the societies we live in. We have to bring this into our worldview. Thank you for listening, and if you like this course, please leave a comment below or on our Facebook page, or if you would like to offer this course on a local level, please email us. You can join atheismuk.com or the Humanist Society or your country's similar organisations, and please YouTube or read the books of any of the so-called Four Horsemen, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris or Daniel Dennett. Thanks for watching.